In 1927, a British archaeologist named Ernest Mackay was excavating a 4,600-year-old city in what is now Pakistan. He found something that stopped him completely. Scattered across the upper levels of the ruins, mixed in with the bones of the dead, were fragments of clay and sand that had been fused together into a solid green glass. Not melted, fused. The kind of fusion that requires temperatures in excess of 1,500 degrees Celsius. Sustained, instantaneous, directed. The kind of temperatures that, in 1927, no known natural phenomenon could produce at ground level. The kind of temperatures that, in 1945, the United States achieved for the first time at a test site in New Mexico called Trinity, when the first atomic bomb was detonated and turned the desert sand into the same green glass. They called it Trinitite. Mackay's material predated Trinity by 4,600 years. The city was called Mohenjo-Daro. In the ancient language of the region, the name translates as the Mound of the Dead. By the end of this documentary, you will understand why some of the physicists who studied this site believed the name was not metaphorical. And you will understand why the ancient Sanskrit texts written by the survivors, if there were survivors, described what destroyed this city in language that reads, in translation, almost exactly like a nuclear detonation. Almost exactly. To understand what was destroyed at Mohenjo-Daro, you first have to understand what it was. The Indus Valley Civilization emerged around 3,300 BCE in the river valleys of what is now Pakistan and northwestern India. At its height, it was the largest civilization on Earth. Larger than Egypt, larger than Mesopotamia, larger than anything existing in Europe at the time. It covered over 1 million square kilometers and contained more than 5 million people. Mohenjo-Daro was its greatest city. Archaeologists estimate its population at between 40 and 80,000 people, a figure that would not be surpassed by any European city for another 3,000 years. The city was engineered with a precision that still confounds modern architects. It had a grid street plan, straight, perpendicular, organized on cardinal directions, that was not seen again in urban design until the Roman Empire, 2,000 years later. Its buildings were constructed of standardized fired brick. Every single brick produced to the same ratio of 1 to 2 to 4. The bricks were fired at a consistent temperature. The variation in size across the entire city is measured in millimeters. Who taught them standardization? Who specified the ratio? There is no record. The system appears, fully formed, at the beginning of the archaeological record. There is no developmental period, no primitive precursor. It simply exists, complete, from the earliest layer. The city had a public water system with individual household connections. It had covered sewers running under the main streets. Sewers that were inspectable, cleanable, and hydraulically engineered. It had public baths built to a level of waterproofing technology that used a tar and brick construction method modern engineers still describe as sophisticated. It had no evidence of temples, no evidence of palaces, no evidence of a ruling class, no evidence of an army. For roughly 700 years, Mohenjo-Daro appears to have been a functioning, organized, technologically advanced civilization that produced no weapons and left no record of war. Then, around 1900 BCE, it ended. Not gradually, not through invasion or famine or drought. It ended in a single event. The bodies were found exactly where they fell. In the street, in the doorways, on the staircases, in groups of 2, 3, 5. As if they had been walking somewhere together and simply stopped. There was no evidence of burial, no evidence of a battle, no evidence that anyone survived long enough to bury the dead. 44 skeletons were recovered from the uppermost layer of the city, the layer corresponding to the final period of occupation. They were found in positions suggesting sudden, unexpected death. Many were found face down in the street, arms extended, as if they had been running and fell without warning. Forensic anthropologist A.R. Khan conducted a study of the skeletal remains in the 1960s. His findings, published in the Proceedings of a Regional Archaeological Conference, noted an anomaly he described as troubling. The bone density and cellular structure of several specimens showed evidence of what he characterized as acute radiation exposure, changes consistent with those observed in survivors of the 1945 atomic bombings in Japan, except that the Mohenjo-Daro subjects showed no sign of survival. The exposure, whatever its source, was lethal and near instantaneous. Khan's study was not widely circulated. It was not refuted. It was simply not followed up. The vitrified material that Ernest Mackay had found in 1927 was analyzed in subsequent decades. The composition of the glass, the temperature required to produce it, the speed of the fusion process, the uniformity of the melt, was consistent with a single massive thermal event. Not a fire, not a kiln, a single simultaneous, extremely high-temperature event affecting the upper city in a radius estimated at approximately 1 kilometer. Conventional archaeology attributes the destruction to an unknown cause. The site report from the final excavation season, completed in 1964, uses the phrase catastrophic termination to describe the end of Mohenjo-Daro. Catastrophic termination. The authors did not speculate further. 4,000 years after Mohenjo-Daro was destroyed, a text was compiled in the Sanskrit language of the Indian subcontinent. It is called the Mahabharata. It is one of the longest texts in human history, 10 times the combined length of the Iliad and the Odyssey. Scholars date its earliest written form to approximately 400 BCE, though the oral tradition it preserves is believed to be considerably older. Some linguists place the root material as far back as 1500 BCE, within 3 to 4 centuries of the destruction of Mohenjo-Daro. The Mahabharata describes weapons, not swords, not spears, not arrows. It describes weapons called astras, divine armaments deployed in great wars between civilizations so advanced they no longer exist. The text's descriptions of these weapons are specific enough that several nuclear physicists, upon reading them in translation, noted the structural parallels to thermonuclear detonation sequences. The Brahmastra is described as follows. It was a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe. An incandescent column of smoke and flame as bright as 10,000 suns rose in all its splendor. It was an unknown weapon, an iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death, which reduced to ashes an entire race. The corpses were so burned as to be unrecognizable. Their hair and nails fell out. Pottery broke without apparent cause. Birds turned white. Foodstuffs were poisoned. To escape from this fire, the soldiers threw themselves in streams to wash themselves and their equipment. This description, written down at the earliest around 400 BCE, preserving an oral tradition possibly originating near the destruction event itself, describes, in sequence, a blinding flash brighter than the sun, a rising column of fire and smoke, mass casualties with unrecognizable burned corpses, hair loss, nail loss, contamination of food and water, the impulse to immerse oneself in water. This is the clinical symptom sequence of acute radiation syndrome following a nuclear detonation. The Mahabharata does not call it radiation. It had no word for radiation. It called it the weapon of Brahma. Mohenjo-Daro is not the only site. In the Rajasthan desert of northwestern India, approximately 10 kilometers from the city of Jodhpur, There exists an area of roughly 8 square kilometers where the sandstone has been fused into a layer of radioactive glass. The layer is consistent in composition with trinitite, the material produced at the Trinity test site. Local samples have shown radiation levels elevated above background by a factor of up to 50. The Indian government has restricted access to sections of this area. The official explanation is geological, a natural uranium deposit in the substrate. Geologists who have studied the composition of the glass layer note that natural uranium deposits do not produce surface fusion of this kind. Uranium ore generates slow radioactive decay. It does not produce a thermal event sufficient to vitrify sandstone. The Rajasthan site has not been excavated. It has not been dated with precision. It sits, fused and radioactive, 10 kilometers from a city of 1 million people, beneath a layer of desert sand that has been building since approximately 2000 BCE. There are similar vitrified sites in Scotland, Ireland, France, and the Middle East. Archaeologists call them vitrified forts, Iron Age structures where the stone walls have been fused into glass. The temperatures required to produce this fusion exceed anything achievable through conventional fire. The mainstream explanation is that defenders lit fires against the walls to reinforce them. The thermal requirements of that explanation do not match the physical evidence. No controlled fire produces temperatures of 1,200 to 1,500 degrees Celsius, sustained long enough to vitrify stone uniformly. No one has offered a better explanation. In July 1945, J. Robert Oppenheimer watched the first atomic bomb detonate at Trinity. As the fireball rose into the sky, he quoted from memory a passage of the Bhagavad Gita, one of the sacred texts of the Hindu tradition, closely related to the Mahabharata. The line he chose was, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Many years later, in a filmed interview, Oppenheimer was asked whether Trinity had been the first nuclear detonation in history. He paused. He looked away from the camera. He said, "Well, in modern times, yes." The interview exists. The pause exists. The qualification exists. In modern times, here is what conventional history cannot account for. The Indus Valley Civilization built a standardized urban infrastructure across 1 million square kilometers with no evidence of a central authority capable of organizing it. They used a system of weights and measures, standardized stone weights found from the Persian Gulf to the Himalayas that are consistent to within 2% across thousands of kilometers and hundreds of years. No other pre-industrial civilization achieved this. They had a writing system. We cannot read it. Over 4,000 inscribed objects have been recovered. The script has never been deciphered. It appears on seals, on pottery, on copper tablets. It stops abruptly at the same moment the civilization ends. Whatever knowledge it encoded has been inaccessible for 4,000 years. The archaeological record of the Indus Valley shows a civilization that, at its peak, was solving civil engineering problems that European cities would not face for another 2 millennia. And then, in what the archaeological record indicates was an extremely short period, possibly a generation, possibly less, it was gone. Not migrated, not collapsed. Gone. The upper layer of Mohenjo-Daro contains a specific class of artifact found nowhere else in the site and nowhere else in the archaeological record of the period. Small, handheld copper objects of unknown function. They are cylindrical. They are hollow. They have a sealed end. Their interior surface shows evidence of extreme heat exposure, as if something very hot was once contained within them. They have no established purpose. They appear only in the final occupation layer, the layer of the dead. The Vedic texts that followed the Indus Valley civilization describe a class of weapons called vimanas, flying craft capable of carrying divine warriors across the sky and deploying weapons from above. The descriptions are aerodynamic. They include references to Mercury vortex engines. They describe craft that generated light, heat, and propulsive force. Mercury vortex propulsion is not a concept that appears in any other pre-industrial text. It was not theorized in Western physics until the 20th century. It is in a text approximately 3,500 years old. Let's assemble what the physical evidence shows. Mohenjo-Daro was a city of extraordinary technological sophistication that existed, fully formed, for approximately 700 years and then ceased to exist following a single catastrophic thermal event. The material evidence at the site includes fused silica glass consistent with extreme temperature events. The skeletal evidence includes bone changes consistent with acute radiation exposure. The spatial evidence, the positions of the bodies, indicates death that was sudden, unexpected, and left no survivors capable of burial. The event radius, based on the distribution of the vitrified material and the skeletal deposits, is consistent with a detonation point above the city center. Not a ground event, an aerial event. The Rajasthan glass field, 10 kilometers from a major population center, is dated to approximately the same period and shows the same physical signature. The Mahabharata, the oldest textual record of the civilization that came after, describes weapons capable of producing these effects with a specificity that cannot be explained as coincidence or metaphor. The symptom sequence alone, flash, column, casualties, hair loss, nail loss, food contamination, the impulse to wash, is too precise to be literary invention. It reads like a witness account from someone who did not have the vocabulary to describe what they witnessed, but described the effects accurately. In 1979, Pakistani archaeologist Dr. Sibte Hassan completed an independent analysis of the Mohenjo-Daro destruction layer. His conclusions, circulated privately among South Asian archaeology institutions, stated that the thermal event at the site could not be explained by any natural cause known to science, and that the pattern of destruction was more consistent with a single high-energy aerial detonation than with any geological or meteorological phenomenon. His paper was never formally published. The institution where he worked declined to submit it for peer review. Hassan retired in 1983. The paper exists in private circulation. 4,600 years after the event, we have physical evidence of a thermal detonation, physical evidence of radiation exposure in human remains, textual evidence describing weapons capable of producing these effects. An Oppenheimer interview with a qualifier no one has explained, and a name for the city that translates as the Mound of the Dead. The people who named it that knew what it was. The mainstream archaeological position on Mohenjo-Daro attributes its collapse to a combination of environmental factors: river diversion, deforestation, climate shift, and possible late-period incursions from Central Asian populations. This explanation accounts for the decline of the civilization. It does not account for the glass. It does not account for the bones. It does not account for the aerial detonation signature in the destruction layer. It does not account for the Rajasthan glass field. It does not account for 4,000 years of texts describing, in precise clinical detail, weapons that produce exactly these effects. And it does not account for one physicist's decision, in 1945, standing at a test site in the New Mexico desert and watching the first atomic fireball climb into the sky, to reach for a Sanskrit text 3,000 years old and find in it, already written, the words for what he had just done. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. He had read those words before the bomb. He chose them after the bomb. He knew the tradition they came from. He knew what the tradition said those weapons had done before. In modern times, yes. There is a city under the ground in Pakistan. Its streets are still there. Its bricks are still there, fired to a standard ratio that modern engineers use today. Its sewers are still there. Its writing is still there, unread. And in the uppermost layer, the layer of the dead, the layer where the city ended, there is still glass, green glass, fused sand, the material signature of a temperature that should not have existed in 1900 BCE. The city of Mohenjo-Daro has been excavated. It has been studied. It has been dated. It has been named a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It has not been explained. Draw your own conclusions.